It was around 4 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and I was speeding along the interstate heading to work. Running late, I stayed in the middle lane, pushing the limits around 75 to 80 miles per hour. Suddenly, a car appeared in my left mirror, moving much faster, probably close to 100 miles per hour. The vehicle, a gray Honda Accord coupe, zipped past me, and out of curiosity, I glanced over. Despite the darkness, I could see the driver staring back at me. But what really caught my attention was someone in the back seat, a young woman. She was pounding frantically on the rear window. At first, I didn't think much of it, assuming she was just playing around. But then, I saw the driver shove her down below the window level, and the car swerved. Something was definitely wrong. She wasn't playing. She was trying to get help. My heart raced as I sped up, determined to keep up with them. From my new position behind the car, I could see the driver reaching back repeatedly in a striking motion, seemingly hitting her. Her arms flailed as she tried to protect herself. It hit me. I was watching a kidnapping unfold in real time. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. Just as I began describing the situation to the operator, the car ahead braked hard, slowing almost to a stop. The driver must have realized I was following him. I wanted to keep my distance, not knowing if he was armed, so I swerved around him and sped ahead. But I couldn't leave the woman behind. I pulled off at the next exit, only to circle back and wait by the side of the road until they passed. When they did, I re-entered the highway, pushing my car to catch up, all while giving 911 updates on our location. Again, I accelerated to 90 miles per hour to catch up, but the driver noticed me before I got close. He slammed on his brakes, trying to stop me. I attempted to go around, but he blocked my way, forcing me to stop. He got out of his car and started running toward me, holding something in his hand. My mind raced as I threw my car in reverse, backing away until he stopped, then quickly shifted to drive and sped past him. The 911 operator reassured me that a state trooper was nearby and instructed me to keep driving until I reached them. Glancing in my rearview mirror, I saw the gray Honda following close behind, both of us pushing 90 miles per hour again. Relief washed over me when I saw flashing red and blue lights in my rearview mirror. The trooper had caught up, positioning himself behind the Honda, forcing the driver to pull over onto the grass. I stopped as well, leaving a safe distance between our vehicles. I watched, heart pounding, as the officer approached the car with his gun drawn. Soon, the driver was on the ground, hands cuffed behind his back. Another police car arrived, and a second officer moved to the back of the Honda, helping the woman out of the car. She was visibly shaken, her face bruised and streaked with tears. But through her exhaustion and fear, she managed to thank me over and over for saving her life. Later, I learned the man was her ex-boyfriend. He'd shown up at her house uninvited, and when she refused to speak to him, he attacked her, forcing her into his car and locking the doors. It's terrifying to think what might have happened if no one had seen her cries for help. I was driving from Chicago to Boston to cheer on a family member running the Boston Marathon. I decided to take Route 20, the sprawling highway stretching across the country, and set off around 3 p.m., hoping to drive straight through without stopping. My GPS said 15 hours, but I was aiming for 14. I figured I'd arrive around 5 a.m. if I kept up my pace. As the hours rolled by, I found myself alone on the road, especially around 1 a.m., with open land stretching on both sides. The highway was almost deserted, and the only thing keeping me awake was the loud music and the caffeine buzz from 2 cups of coffee. I could feel exhaustion creeping in, but I was determined to push through to the finish. Then, out of nowhere, headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. I was in the left lane, so I moved over to let the car pass. But instead of overtaking me, the driver pulled up beside me and slowed to match my speed, hanging right next to me. It felt strange, so I tried to pass him, but as soon as I did, he pulled behind me, sticking close to my bumper. I sped up to put some distance between us, but he matched my speed, and when I switched lanes, he followed. It was clear something was off. This wasn't just a random driver, it was some beat-up old black pickup truck with no identifying marks, and it was tailing me aggressively. The truck began flashing its lights, trying to get my attention. I was genuinely rattled. I'd never encountered anything like this before. I pushed the gas pedal a bit harder, hoping to spot another car or a police cruiser, but the road ahead was empty. Then, the truck swung into the other lane and surged forward, passing me with a loud roar. He cut in front of me, slamming his brakes hard. I had no choice but to hit mine, and when I tried to maneuver around him, he blocked me, forcing me to slow down. The driver started signaling for me to pull over, waving his arm out the window. I wasn't about to listen. The moment he eased toward the shoulder, I swerved around him and floored it. My car was fast, and I hoped it would outpace his old truck. But even as I hit 100 miles per hour, he stayed on my tail. I took the next exit, figuring he'd give up, but as I reached the red light at the bottom of the ramp, he was still right behind me. Then, he pulled up next to me. I glanced over, and his window rolled down. There were 3 people inside, all wearing identical white masks, staring at me. The sight was chilling, and I felt a real sense of danger. I blew through the red light and sped onto the main road where, thankfully, there were other cars. The pickup finally backed off, fading into the distance. I pulled into a Walmart parking lot a few miles away, shaken and exhausted, and decided to rest for a bit. I woke up around 8 a.m. and finished my drive to Boston. When I told my family about the incident, I warned them to be careful on empty highways late at night. I never caught the plate number, if there even was one, but that old black 90s pickup with its eerie masked passengers left a lasting impression. It was a late Tuesday night in March, and I was driving home from a friend's place in the city. Normally, it would be about an hour's drive, but a dense fog had rolled in over the lonely stretch of highway, making everything feel slower and more surreal. The road was almost deserted at 1 a.m., with only the occasional semi passing by, their plates showing strange lettering and colors from far-off places. After a long day of shopping and cafe hopping with my friend, exhaustion was setting in, and the thick fog seemed to lull me into a trance. I drove slowly, hazards on, barely able to see more than a few feet ahead. Out of nowhere, a car appeared, half in the lane, half on the shoulder. I slammed on my brakes, narrowly avoiding it. Heart pounding, I pulled over behind the black sedan, needing a moment to catch my breath. The car in front of me began to roll slowly off the road, coming to a full stop on the shoulder. I watched as the driver's window rolled down and an arm signaled for me to follow. Still shaken, I hesitated, but decided to pull off the road a bit further. The sedan turned onto a side road, and I cautiously followed. It came to a stop, and the driver's door opened. A tall, lean man in a black jacket and jeans stepped out, walking toward my car with a casual smile. He looked like he was in his early 30s. I cracked my window, expecting he might apologize for the close call. When he reached my window, he motioned for me to roll it down further. I shook my head, only lowering it a little more and telling him I could hear him fine. He asked where I was heading, and I simply replied, "Home." He said the fog wouldn't be lifting anytime soon and suggested it wasn't safe to keep driving in such conditions. I told him I was fine, but he raised an eyebrow and asked why I'd pulled over, as if doubting me. Not wanting trouble, I lied and said I'd stopped to check my phone. He smirked, giving me a look that suggested he saw through the lie. Then he mentioned he lived just down the road with his wife and son, and if I wanted to wait out the fog, I could come with him. I shook my head, declining the offer, but he wouldn't let it go. He started listing statistics about accidents in fog, telling me how dangerous it was and how I looked tired, hinting that I should think about my family before driving on. His persistence made me uncomfortable, but I stayed firm. He glanced back at his car, and that's when I noticed a figure shifting in the passenger seat. Someone I hadn't seen before. Suddenly, he grabbed my door handle, trying to open it. My heart raced as I realized it was locked. At that moment, the passenger door of his car flew open and another man stepped out, wielding a baseball bat, moving quickly toward me. Without a second thought, I threw my car in reverse as the driver yelled something at his friend. The man with the bat took a swing, but missed as I backed away. I maneuvered my car, struggling to find the highway in the dense fog. With a quick prayer, I floored it, merging back onto the highway without a backward glance. Even now, whenever I drive that stretch of road, I wonder if they targeted anyone else that night, and what might have happened if I had rolled my window down just a bit further. Scary things can happen on the road late at night. It's when the world gets quiet and strange people emerge, so you have to be especially careful. This happened back in 2020, around when COVID was just beginning. I often worked overnight shifts at a hospital with unpredictable hours. My route home was always the same, a 10-mile drive up a nearly deserted parkway to my town. Even during the day, that road wasn't busy, but with the pandemic, it felt like a ghost town. It was rare to see anyone else on the road, let alone a state trooper. Most nights, that worked to my advantage, letting me get home faster. One night, or rather in the early morning hours, I was heading home on that empty parkway. Through the dark, I noticed a red flashing SOS light ahead. It was coming from a car on the side of the road, and the glow illuminated its tail lights in the darkness. Someone clearly needed help, and feeling unusually generous, I decided to stop. As I pulled over in front of the car, I saw a man standing by the roadside, waving his arms. I turned on my hazards and stepped out to approach him. He looked like a Hispanic man in his late 20s or early 30s, though the COVID mask he wore made it hard to tell his age. He said his battery had died after he'd pulled over, and I asked if he had jumper cables. When he shook his head, I realized I wasn't sure how else to help. Offering him a ride crossed my mind, but before I could say anything, he asked if he could borrow my cell phone to make a quick call, saying his own phone was dead. I hesitated but ended up handing him my unlocked phone, reluctantly opening the phone app for him. He began talking to someone, then slowly wandered a few steps away as he continued his conversation. With his car door open and the keys still in the ignition, I thought I'd try starting his car myself. To my surprise, when I turned the key, the car's battery came on. I tried the hazards, then the radio. Everything was working fine. Finally, I turned the key fully, and the engine started right up. In that split second, I realized I might have walked into a trap. Just as the engine roared to life, I felt arms wrap around my throat from the back seat, trying to choke me. The guy with my phone began yelling, "Hey, hey," as he ran back toward the car. Somehow I managed to break free from the grip and saw that my attacker was a teenage kid hiding in the back seat. Ignoring the man's shouting, I bolted back to my own car, getting inside and speeding away. Just as I drove off, I heard a loud pop from behind. When I finally got home, I saw my rear windshield was cracked and riddled with a bullet hole. The realization shook me. That guy had fired at me. Even worse, he still had my phone, unlocked and filled with all my personal information. I quickly told my parents what happened and called 911 on the house phone. When the police arrived, they suggested calling AT&T right away to see if they could track the last call made on my phone. But customer service didn't open until 7 a.m., so we had to wait. I used my dad's phone to lock mine remotely, hoping to prevent them from seeing anything too personal like my home address. At 7 a.m., I called AT&T, but they informed me that no calls had been logged since my conversation with my mom the day before. The man hadn't actually called anyone. Worse, I discovered that the Bitcoin I held in my Coinbase account was gone, transferred to an untraceable wallet address. It was a huge financial loss, and the phone stopped updating its location soon after, likely turned off or discarded.